Happy Tuesday. It's a glorious Tuesday. And I'm going to be talking about New York City, but I'm not actually digging New York City this time. This is actually a positive story. I don't know if I talked about this story or not. I've covered many stories and I rarely follow up on them. But when he got elected, he was pretty much going to tell if you're homeless, we're going to arrest you and we're going to give you help. We're going to take away your civil liberties and we're going to send you to a hospital. You'll have no choice in the matter. Like I said, it was a gamble. Now, this is something that us Americans will have to come to terms with is at what point do we say enough is enough and we give the states rights with the ability to take away someone's civil liberties and arrest them for their own good. Not necessarily send them into prison, but send them into rehab. And I'm not talking about a couple of days. I'm not talking about psych eval. I'm talking about months at a time. And we're going to have to come to terms with that. And then I think there's a sensible way of doing it that temporarily takes away a homeless person's right while giving them the help that they desperately need. And it looks like New York has found that balance with some of the people that they've been doing this to. This comes from the New York Times. He was handcuffed. He was handcuffed and hospitalized, and now he's on track for housing. The contentious New York policy to send more mentally ill homeless people to hospitals have helped some move into permanent homes. Like I said, this was a gamble. In the coldest, on the coldest night of the winter, Mazu Makakala was sleeping under an overpass in the Bronx when an ambulance crew arrived. The wind chill was minus 4 degrees. Paramedics and the homeless outreach worker told Mr. Makakala that he had to go either to a shelter or a hospital. Mr. Makakala, a former warehouse manager from West Africa nation of Niger, or is it Nigeria? No, it's Niger, who has been homeless for about a decade, declined to do either. But he had no choice. The police showed up, and to my surprise, Mr. Makakala said, they handcuffed me, and I spent the next 104 days at Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx being treated for schizophrenia. I don't know why I can't say that word. Mr. Makula, 59, was hospitalized under a contentious policy Mayor Eric rolled out last fall to address a homeless crisis unraveling in plain view of the streets of the nation's biggest city. I'll learn to read one of these days. The mayor directive called for the police, paramedic, and groups to work with homeless New Yorkers to send people to hospitals when the mental illness leaves them unable to meet the basic living needs, even if they're not threatening to hurt themselves or others. It has met with criticisms and a legal challenge, but one social service agency in the Bronx has been sending people to the hospital says that the policy is yielding encouraging results thanks to largely to more diligent and longer-term hospital treatment. As American City struggles to turn back the rising tide of homeless, New York is part of a broader movement to reconsider longer psychiatric hospital stays half a century after mental institutions have become brutal warehouse of humanity were emptied but never replaced with a coherent system of care. Alex versus Bernard, a New York University psychology who studies psychiatric hospitalization, said that Mr. Adam was one of several prominent Democrats, including leaders in California and Oregon, to seek a sort of reframing coercion as compassion. Relatively a few people in New York have been hospitalized under the basic needs standards, though the city's declined to say how many. Probably for privacy reasons, but though if it's working, you should be transparent up to the point to where they can't identify someone. But the Bronx Works, the agency with the city outreach contracted in Bronx, has sent 9 clients to the hospitals, including Mr. Mancala. Most have either moved into permanent housing or are on track to do so. One woman who was hospitalized in her late 70s had been homeless for so long that her campsite of White Plains Road shows up on Google Street View images going back to 2016. Bronx Works says that the city hospitals, which have been criticized for quickly discharging homeless psychiatric patients without helping them, now often keep people long enough to give them meaningful treatment and get them ready for housing. Their severity to mentally ill people who we've been chasing after for years, said Scott Otwart, Bronx Works Assistant Executive Director. Something's changed out there. It's working. The people sent to hospital under Mr. Adams' directive, I should say Mayor Adams' directive, have typically not been those whom many New Yorkers are most worried about. People who are violent, but city officials says that the directive is aimed at getting help to those who fall through the cracks over and over, whether or not they are a threat. This is really about focusing on a fairly small population of the people that we know, says Brian Stetton, the mayor's senior advisor for severe mental illness, because they're kind of stuck in a revolving door system. People threatening violence are still a subject to hospitalization or arrest if the police happen to be on the scene. Mr. Mancala was one of 6 hospitalized Bronx Works clients who were on a so-called top 50 watch list for chronic homeless people with mental illness whom the city considers particularly resistant to intervention. Being on the list does not mean that someone is targeted for involuntary hospitalization, but it means that the system keeps an eye on them, at least in theory. Last month, Mayor Adam seized on the death of Jordan Neely, a man on the top 50 list who was acting erratically when he was fatally choked by a subway passenger, to re-emphasize that the case for forced hospitalization. Maybe they forced Jordan Neely to seek help. He wouldn't have been on that train if they kept him behind bars for one of his 41 or 42 arrests. He would not have been on that train. I mean, 6 way one way, half a dozen the other. We must look at involuntary removal of those that cannot take care of their basic needs and are in danger to themselves. He said, it breaks my heart how Jordan lost his life. I mean, it's very tragic with Jordan, don't get me wrong. Some families of patients hospitalized by the Bronx Works had helplessly watched their loved ones deteriorate. I begged for help. I asked God to help me and my brother. Help me with my brother, said Orlando Solano, who said his 67-year-old brother, one-time doctor, started living on the streets, chased by paranoid delusions about 15 years ago. I even looked for some paramedics and told them the situation, but they told me that they couldn't do anything unless my brother had a very serious crisis. His brother's at a nursing home where his mental and physical health are so improved he's like another person, Mr. Solano said. While a shortage of hospital psychiatric beds persists in New York, the state and the city have recently opened about an 80 beds where patients can get extended care for months. Nothing about the 7 to 14-day hospitalization is going to change the arc of the life of someone who is homeless and has schizophrenia. Don't know why I can't say that. It's schizophrenia. Schizophrenia. There we go. Schizophrenia, says Michael Katz, the head of the public hospitals. The outreach group have suddenly invoked the power to have clients removed because of their work. Delicate dance of getting someone to accept help and move indoors relies on trust that the hospitals will not help the patient. Damaging that trust did not seem worth it. If you're going to forcefully take away someone's right or somebody's right and take them to the hospital against their will, you want to make sure that you're not making the situation worse, Mr. Otwart said. I understand that phrase, but at a certain point, you're going to have to involuntarily hospitalize someone in order for them to be medicated to see the errors of their ways and hopefully want to keep that going. Bronx, but also to see how it could be abused, which I hope that there's safeguards in place, whichever route that the United States go. I hope there's a safe route or safeguards in place to prevent the reason why asylums were shut down in the first place. Bronxworth sent the first person to hospital under the mayor's directive on Christmas night when the wind chill was 12 degrees. The outreach worker on a elevated subway station approached a woman in her 60s who refused to talk to them for 5 years. Her legs were covered in ulcers and were so swollen that she could not get socks on. One foot was bare. She screamed when the police arrived, but she got into the ambulance. At Jacob B, as treatment and medication took hold, the woman warmed, said Olivia Cooley, Bronxworth clinical coordinator for the outreach. She went on saying, "When are you going to visit again and see me next?" After 5 months of a new state-run bed at Manhattan Psychiatric Center, the woman was accepted into permanent supportive housing this month. This is good news. These are people who would normally not seek treatment, get treatment, and they're no longer a threat to themselves or to society. So this is, I gotta give Mayor Adams props for this, because without his direction, this would never have happened. There are 5 clients Bronx removed are either headed for permanent housing, 3 remain in hospitals or nursing homes. The last one's on the street because Bronxworth said the City Hospital Lincoln Medical Center discharged him the same day without notifying Bronxworks. Juan Rivera, Bronxworth Outreach Director, says that he's seeing a more collaboration and more buy-ins from the hospital staffs, or in the past sometimes failed to consider patients' psychiatric history when discharging them. No, I thought this was a really shorter story, but regardless. Mr. Seaton said that the push led by Adams' administration has made a difference on how we're handling these cases on the ground. And the pending legal challenge to the mayor directive argues against having the police make decisions about whom to send to the hospital. The lawsuit does not address hospitalizations like those initiated by Bronxworks. Matt Kudish, the chief executive of the National Alliance on Mental Illness of New York City, a plaintiff in the case, said, while forced short hospitalization stays typically do not have good outcomes, it was great to hear from a reporter that Bronxworth have seen clients move from the street to housing under the directive. Mr. Rivera says involuntary hospitalization was always the last resort, but sometimes essential. It's our job to keep people safe, he said. We can leave someone with wounds that's clearly looked infected and sitting in feces and urine. Do you think they have the right to stay there? Maybe, but do we have a responsibility as a social service provider and social workers and ultimately as human beings to look out for this person? Because if we don't, who's going to do it? He added that too often that they're called to identify clients who have died according to the city exposures to cold that killed 12 unsheltered people from mid 2021 to mid 2022, the second leading external cause of death after overdoses. Yeah, there's a this is it. Don't worry, I'm almost done. While most people in the Bronx are sent to the hospitals are not violent, one woman brandished a makeshift weapon and an outreach worker. She responded quickly to medication and has moved into supportive housing. While Mr. Murakaba was at Jacobi, a city-run hospital, his younger brother, a nurse practitioner, visited him. For years, the brother said Mr. Mancala had angrily accused of him spying for the FBI and the CIA. The hospital, Mr. Mancala says, we embrace each other. Mr. Mancala had mixed feelings about his hospital stint. He liked getting 3 meals a day. He took his first shower in 10 months. He was reunited with his daughter that he hasn't seen in 8 years, but he was being medicated against his will and he was not free. I'm like in prison, he said in one April afternoon, in a bright visiting room decorated with arts by patients, including a menagerie of an African animals he drew. On May 18th, he moved into an apartment-style shelter ran by Bronx Works, which is working to find him supportive housing. He takes his antipsychotic medication, not because he thinks he needs it, but because he says Bronx Works would be upset if he stopped. It's good to have that motivation, to be honest. Life is good, Mr. Monco said outside of his shelter. This place is better than living on the streets. So this is actually a gamble that Mayor Adams, Mr. Eric Adams, made, and it is paying dividends. This is an approach that we need to take in all major cities, Austin, Texas included, to involuntary hospitalize someone against their wills for months at a time, not just a psych checkup, but actually make sure that they're taking their medicine, and hopefully it sticks. Now, not every case is going to be able to be solved for this. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 trips to the mental health hospital in order for something to click, but we must continue doing this. I'd rather my taxpayer money go towards giving these people help that they desperately need, regardless if they want it or not, opposed to just letting them rot in front of us while doing nothing. With that being said, that is my video for today, and have yourself a wonderful day, morning, or evening.